So good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the latest of our Enterprise 5G webinars. My name is Ian Gillett from IGR. I'll be playing moderator today. There's a bunch of people still signing in, so we'll go through a few logistics and then we'll dive into it. Today we're talking about manufacturing. It's been a big subject for private networks, enterprise networks, obviously. The subtitle we put on this was "Some Assembly Required." Probably a few things left to do. We'll talk about that today. So a couple of housekeeping things. We are being recorded today. He says as he checks that the recording light is actually on. Yes. And we will make the recording available in a day or two. The yard guys just decided to come and do my yard, so you may be able to hear in the background. So as soon as I finish talking, I'll mute myself. But what we're going to do is dive in today and we'll get started. We've got 3 presentations. We will be taking questions. If you have questions, just use the questions tab on the GoToWebinar control panel there, and we'll either address them as we go or we'll have time at the end. Okay. So with that, firstly, I do need to thank the Ongo Alliance that have been supporting us in this series of webinars. And in terms of speakers today, we have Oza, who is the guy in the CBRS sweatshirt, which is the coolest design. We saw it on Tuesday for the first time. If you're an AC/DC fan, you know that logo. And he's also in his garage. He just pointed out that's actually a garage door opener above his head. Jim Ellis, who's up there in Phoenix. Jim Jacobelix, he's the guy who's smiling, who looks nothing like his photo on the slide. Ouch. And Todd Nate, who's in Dallas there in the middle, who joined us as well. And now you can really hear the leaf blower. However you can, I can. All right, so in terms of what we're going to talk about, I'm going to kick things off, kind of set the stage, and then we're going to, Oza's going to go first, and then Jim, then Todd. And basically what I asked them to talk about was, look, what is this opportunity? What are the use cases for private networks 5G within manufacturing? What's the environment like? What are the communications needs within manufacturing? So obviously there's some specific things they need to look at here. And then what are the critical success factors? So we will get into CBRS and all those things as we go through. In terms of the 5G world, this is a diagram I've shown before. Obviously, in our world, we see everything being connected with 5G, either an outdoor network or an indoor. And obviously, this is going to take some time. This is not today, but we're getting there. We're building. And of course, for manufacturing, you'll see down the bottom left. Really, we're talking about manufacturing plants, and we'll talk about the use cases today. But just to let you know, there's a lot of different types of manufacturing in the US. Everybody thinks when you say manufacturing, they automatically think of cars, trucks, planes. You think of big stuff. There's a lot of small stuff as well. Obviously, but there's a lot of other things as well that happen. So it's a pretty big sector. And due at the end of April 29, is actually on transportation, logistics, and ports. And so we'll be looking more at the trucking, the FedEx distribution type things at that time. Okay. So today we're really going to look at the manufacturing side of this. All right. In terms of the size, this is some stats from our latest forecast we've been putting together. So in 2020, there's about 356,000 companies or establishments that do manufacturing. There's about 7.5 million companies in the United States. Now, establishment, you could have a big conglomerate of companies with like that, could be separate companies within, so it would count multiple times. But everybody thinks manufacturing is much bigger. It's about actually 5% of the companies in the US, roughly. Everybody thinks it's 20–30%. It's really not. Now, it means we do have some big companies, but we have a lot of small companies as well. In terms of how much floor space is actually enclosed, so how big are those manufacturing plants? then there's about 12.1 billion square feet of floor space in US manufacturing. So you can work out that per company if you want to, etc. In terms of the biggest, food is 10%, fabricated metal products, so I guess it's brackets, fasteners, etc., is 13%, transportation's 10%, plastics, rubber is 8%, chemicals 8%, primary metals is 6%, and machinery is 8%, and the other 38% are shoes, apparel, furniture, etc., etc. So pretty diverse. It's pretty well split up, but again, obviously a pretty big opportunity for private networking, etc. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Oza, and he's going to talk through Celona's view on the manufacturing space.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ian. Hello, everybody. Very nice meeting you virtually. Reporting from the garage, as Ian said, I'm having some Wi-Fi coverage trouble. So in case you hear my voice stutter, that's probably why. To avoid that, I'm just going to turn off my video just in case, just so you know. So who is Celona? We, besides cool swag that we put together, we actually also offer a private mobile networking solution. Leaders come from different enterprise networking, cloud software, cellular wireless background, and we're trying to create a private wireless, private mobile networking solution that's consumable, accessible by the enterprise audience, recognized by our investors, of course, that you'll see at the bottom right, but also recognized by Ongo Alliance and other industry leaders as doing something smart and useful. In the next slide, I try to give you a picture of how this whole thing got started. As you saw on my hoodie, CBRS arrived, and that's how it all started. CBRS, in our point of view, as enterprise networking professionals, including myself, after spending 14 years at HP Aruba, I realized that we can actually push the boundaries of enterprise wireless even more, because now we have a spectrum that's accessible by the enterprise that gives us access to LTE 5G, which is a highly, highly reliable wireless technology. It requires some smart technology to coordinate with FCC certified systems to get access to that spectrum, but that's our job. Our customers and our partners don't necessarily have to worry about the intricacies of that. And once that's done, we also saw a massive adoption of devices, and I have a couple of device recommendations that can be used in manufacturing environments where these devices can access the Wi-Fi, of course, traditionally. They can, many of them can access the public LTE networks, of course, but if you want to build your own private mobile network, private LTE 5G networks, there's 100+ devices out there in that URL that you see there that are ready to go. So we got devices, we got spectrum, we got a great wireless technology. Why shouldn't we just push boundaries on enterprise wireless? That's the crux of our technology story. And the next slide, I dive a little bit deeper into use cases, really. And if we can move to the next one, there we go. In the manufacturing environment, there are things that have to work, and you can imagine Wi-Fi to have its own place with laptop connectivity and BYOD devices and things like that. But as we all know, manufacturing facilities, they change a lot. There's lots of movements. Production lines might get upgraded, and new business processes could be implemented. And just generally, they're very hard place to cover from a wireless coverage perspective. Ideal for cellular wireless, right? We know that cellular wireless works in long ranges, highly reliable, predictable SLA, all that good stuff that we all experience in our personal lives. And where that technology fits is stuff that has to work, stuff that cannot go down because it will impact our manufacturing production. So AGVs, ruggedized tablets used by staff that we spend millions of dollars on if you're a manufacturing customer, push-to-talk communications, video surveillance, and I'm going to give you some examples of that. So we took that story to a couple of different customers. I have 2 case studies in the next 2 slides. So if we can move to the next one. Ian, I think this one is for indoor coverage. Maybe the slides are not updating for me as fast. There we go. Okay, so this one is indoor coverage. It's actually in a warehouse, but it's very relevant because AGVs are also becoming very popular in manufacturing, possibly more popular in manufacturing compared to warehouses today. These devices used to use a Wi-Fi to Ethernet adapter to connect to an existing Wi-Fi network to send telemetry and to receive instructions. And that communication between these robots and the backend application needs to be really fast, but also needs to have low latency so that we can take real-time actions. So we were able to manage to cover this area in addition to Wi-Fi APs that are already in place with Celona's CBRS LTE access points, which I'm going to highlight what they are and what they look like in a bit. So the result is better coverage, dedicated interference-free spectrum for these robots, and lower latency as a result of LTE wireless technology. In the next slide, we extend that coverage to outdoors, where a lot of these manufacturing sites, they may already have a process infrastructure already in design. It might take them too much time to get going on implementing a new infrastructure, and sometimes they just prefer to start getting used to the technology outdoors. It's easier to put up a couple of poles, maybe install a couple of APs on a rooftop, cover a large area. And CBRS LTE offers up to 1 million square feet of coverage outdoors with a single access point compared to 100,000 square feet with Wi-Fi. So an enterprise IT professional looks at that and goes, okay, I got temporary work sites, I got trailers, I got video surveillance gear. Why don't we just start testing if that theory matches our real world environment? And this is an example from one of our manufacturing customers that are deploying technology right now in their outdoor spaces with future adoption perhaps in indoors. Okay, so that's kind of the summary of the use cases and the technology benefits that customers are seeing. In the next slide, I give you, what did these customers actually deploy? What do they use? So we have a single product subscription. So we're a product vendor. We're not a services vendor. We provide our products to our managed service providers or our IT, OT channel partners. They build services around, and ultimately we serve at the benefit of our joint customers. The package includes our software platform, includes network management, operational portal, API libraries, mobile core software, etc. Includes hardware-wise SIM cards that go with the APs, access points, indoor and outdoor, which are also known as eNode Bs in the cellular wireless world. This infrastructure deploys on an existing enterprise network, as you will see in the next diagram. And all we're trying to do is make it as accessible, make sophisticated cellular wireless technology as accessible to an enterprise IT audience as much as they have fun with firewalls, switches, routers, Wi-Fi, right? It shouldn't look and feel and act anything different. It just needs to use a different wireless technology. That's the goal here with the simplicity of the architecture. In the next slide, you see kind of how this thing fits in an enterprise environment. Lots of small boxes, kind of a eye chart here. But essentially, you have devices that natively support CBRS-based LTE, which I'm going to give you a few examples of. And you have devices that just support Ethernet and Wi-Fi, which might use gateways and routers to connect to our access points indoors and outdoors. We seamlessly sit on top of an existing enterprise network over local area and or wide area. Celona Edge is where the 4G, 5G mobile core runs, and also that's where the enterprise network configuration integration happens, and then we manage everything from the cloud using Celona Orchestrator. If we dive into the next slide, you will see my device recommendations, which are kind of important, right? Because we do spend a lot of time and money on these devices. They better be the right devices. So in the next slide, we can go to that. Let's see if it's loading for me. Yep, it loaded. Great. So on the smart device recommendations, definitely Motorola Evolve for push-to-talk. Android device, we tested in the lab, works great. If you care about push-to-talk voice, definitely take a look at it. Samsung Xcover Pro, Also kind of sort of push-to-talk optimized, but it's a smart device, a well-known operating system, lots of different security features with Samsung Business. And there's some interesting Microsoft Teams integrations that I will mention in the next one. Zebra ruggedized tablet, tested well on CBRS LTE, and it's well worth the price given all the features that come with it. So in the next slide, double click on Samsung Xcover Pro, in case you're looking for a device that can kind of operate Wi-Fi and CBRS LTE simultaneously. The physical programmable button integrates with Microsoft Teams to enable push-to-talk on Microsoft Teams in addition to video conferencing. But it also allows you to select which app goes through Wi-Fi and which apps go through CBRS LTE. So we see this device application and connectivity ecosystem actually already merging these multiple wireless technologies in the enterprise space, which is great to see. So next slide, probably the last before the last one. The gateway router recommendations, you're going to have AGVs, cameras, other devices that may require CBRS LTE connectivity but doesn't support it yet. So these devices, RV55 from Sierra, Cradlepoint R500, which is relatively new, and BEC MX240 are really good options if you're trying to use an adapter to actually connect to a CBRS network. All right, so with that, I'm going to switch over to, I believe, my last slide. Let's see if that's actually the case. Probably the last one from last. So Celona microslicing is something that I have to mention. It's one of our key technologies. These devices, the applications running on top, they have to be translated to enterprise network configuration, VLANs, IP subnets, different user group policies, just like a Wi-Fi client or an Ethernet desktop client would. That's what the expectation is from enterprise IT audience. So that's what microslicing does. It translates cellular wireless quality of service, SIM provisioning, access policies to enterprise networking policies. And they also assign guaranteed throughput, latency, jitter, packet error rate at a device level and an application group level. It really makes that translation happen, kind of the secret sauce of the overall solution. Okay, let me close with key questions, key considerations that we constantly hear from our audience. We usually work with information technology leaders, and they're worried about keeping their critical applications running, operational on their existing Wi-Fi network. We believe that we can offer an additional level of trust and confidence to those devices and applications. So if any one of you worried about uptime on a Wi-Fi network, we should talk. Operational technology teams are usually worried about pushing the boundaries on different digital initiatives. They're the ones coming up with the next device idea or the next business automation idea. And they usually create problems for the IT networking teams to make that network up and running. So if you're in the middle of a new digital initiative, CBRS LTE wireless might remove tons of friction for you as you interact with networking groups. And if you're a part of an innovation team, you have to have an answer for what's your 5G strategy. We do have some ideas, as you can tell, and would love to talk to you about what that means for your organization and how we can contribute, and always open to a free trial or a POC of the overall solution to keep the momentum going on your end. So I think that was my 12 to 13 minutes. With that, I will hand it over back to Ian.
Great, thanks. And for the audience, I gave them each 12 minutes and Oza was exactly 12 minutes. So he wins the prize so far. We'll see how Jim does in a minute. I know, Jim, I know the pressure's on. So Oza, quick question for you that came in here. You mentioned warehousing to start with. Do you include warehousing in that manufacturing vertical for you, or is it all industrial? How do you view it?
Yeah, similar properties, but definitely different. Just the way many of them are 24/7 operation. Many of them are challenging from a wireless coverage perspective, but applications differ, performance expectations differ, although they might look and feel the same. So I guess you can put them under industrial, hard, challenging environments to cover, but then as you double click, you see quite good differences. I wanted to highlight the AGV example because I think that's going to be a pretty hot application in manufacturing for CBRS LTE.
And from our perspective at IGR, warehousing is actually a separate vertical. The CBEX, the government data, actually splits it out. So those numbers I showed earlier for manufacturing are just manufacturing. We've got the equivalent for warehousing. And I'll actually include that in the next webinar when we talk about transportation and logistics, because it really kind of fits in that same thing. All right, so Jim Jacobellis from Geoverse is sitting there patiently, and he's got 12 minutes. So the pressure's on, Jim. Over to you.
Okay, thanks for all that pressure, Ian. Hello, everyone. As some of you may know, I'm a regular on the Ian Show, so happy to be back. Little background on Geoverse. We are a wholly owned subsidiary of a company called ATN International, publicly traded, stock symbol ATNI. And in the US, they basically have three business segments. One is what they call Service Provider Solutions. We are the largest wholesale roaming carrier in the US, covering about 15 states where the AT&T, T-Mobile, Verizon use our spectrum and our towers and our cell sites to actually roam. A lot of those are Nokia sites, Todd, you'll be happy to know. And then we also have a rural and broadband kind of customer-facing division. So we have a brand that does everything from be a WISP in that footprint to a cellular provider, and we're even a fiber provider, take advantage of Connect America funding, E-rate, and stuff like that for that footprint. And then I'm with the private network division, what's happened recently is all these divisions have merged into one, and we're kind of approaching private network as a cellular carrier, leveraging all these cellular resources that we've had in the US for 30 plus years. So, you know, operations support, call center support, the carrying devices, all that kind of stuff that go along with being a cellular carrier, only we're leveraging those resources so that an industrial or manufacturing or warehousing or whatever you want to call it, Ian, can take advantage of that. You're slow on the switch. My 12 minutes are going to expire soon. Just kind of this is more of a kind of a background information for everyone. As far as private LTE or private 5G networks are concerned, we look at this as there's really four main building blocks to enable a network. Number one is what spectrum we use. We talked about CBRS. Great thing, 150 megahertz of spectrum that anyone can use in the US. The first example is shared spectrum. Basically billions of dollars of resources are now offered for free for manufacturing users to take advantage of. The next element is the RAN or the LTE or the access point or the eNode B. Lots of words for that particular layer. And you know, there are lots of options from enterprise grade to carrier grade options, depending on what your use case is and what your ultimate goal is, perhaps migrating to 5G with that same layer. All those things come into consideration. And then where our core competency exists is on the left or the right two, one being the core and the traditional SIM card services that a cellular operator may deliver to you for your public network. We do that for private networking. And you know, this is basically you know, an LTE plus other interconnect elements that connect to the public cellular world, plus the SIM cards that go into those devices that Ozer just showed earlier. And the SIM cards are basically the authentication that allows the device to communicate with the radio layer that is out there. And if you're familiar with LTE, this is LTE going to 5G. So the security element is significantly greater because of that SIM authentication versus Wi-Fi. And then the last element, when everyone forgets about this, Ian, is how do I get my smartphones to work just using the CBRS layer? So we have that public-private, you know, service transparency, if you will, that comes along with our offering. And additionally, we were very active in the recent CBRS PAL auctions. So we bring kind of licensed CBRS to the equation in this footprint. And then if you switch to the next slide, Ian, we also have 600 and 700 megahertz spectrum available for private networks. This may not be that popular with traditional manufacturing, but as you get into probably another category that Ian has that isn't included, oil and gas, mining, that type of industrial, this is a big deal for them because 600 and 700 megahertz travels further than what CBRS would travel, and it gives them a comfort level for some mission critical applications, if you will. And so just kind of little 4 bullets on where we see the connectivity challenges. And again, I went beyond manufacturing, Ian, I apologize. So I'm all about industrial, and maybe I violated your rule. But I think it's pretty consistent, whether it's just in time warehousing, manufacturing, or even a mine. I mean, I think the connectivity challenges are pretty similar. And the first one is typically these locations were not top of mind when a cellular carrier put in their cellular coverage. They wanted, you know, they're aiming their cell sites, their capacity at where there's a lot of traffic. And typically these weren't top of mind when they designed their cellular network. Secondarily, I think I mentioned this earlier, you know, the typical option for most everything up until January of 2020 was Wi-Fi as the wireless connectivity element. And now, because of CBRS available anywhere in the US, you now have a wireless connectivity layer that is something more than best effort. It offers QoS, it offers the ability to do things that you couldn't do from a security and operational perspective by just using Wi-Fi. And the third is, and you'd be surprised by this, Ian, but there's still a lot of folks that think of wiring first. And so whether it be Ethernet or high speed fiber, even on a factory floor, that's still a consideration. And the reason you think of that is they think, okay, well, Wi-Fi isn't good enough for this, so I'm going to wire it. And the familiarity with LTE and CBRS and kind of edge compute just isn't there yet. So, you know, your applications for video, for robotics, for even things like your EV charging stations that are becoming more popular in parking lots, whether they be at manufacturing facilities or otherwise. This has become a viable option using private LTE CBRS for that sort of thing. And then the last bullet is traditionally a lot of folks in the industrial class have taken a route where I'm going to get a VPN from my cellular carrier and approach things that way. And that often proved problematic because the coverage wasn't that great in that environment. And then B, I think there's more of a movement to try and keep your own data. And, you know, public carriers are public carriers for a reason. They like to keep that data. So the private networking, private LTE, private 5G give you opportunity to keep your own data. So again, pardon the word industrial, Ian, but I think the message here is with a properly designed and integrated private LTE, you have the ability to create a foundation to support digital applications that are not only digital, but you can take you know, your iPhone, your Samsung device, whatever you're using on your carrier network, and create a personal kind of voice experience as well that, may meet all the policy requirements, and they're typically very strict in a manufacturing environment, to use this same layer for that purpose as well. And then the final slide, and hopefully I'm under that 12-minute milestone of yours, Ian, is often overlooked, is the operations and support required for something like a private cellular, private LTE, private 5G, whatever you want to call it. IT resources are really hard to find, and finding an IT resource with cellular heritage is probably even harder to find. So there's frankly a decision that needs to be made. You want to build this skill set in-house, or do you want to work with kind of a managed service partner to do this? And there's probably about, I think we're north of 20 commercial installations with private LTE, both on CBRS and licensed spectrum. And thinking about this is as critical as thinking about, what radio you pick and what core you use and that sort of thing. So I wanted to close with that to make sure that that message was out there.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. So to echo Jim's point, and there are still a couple of questions for you, Jim, but I'll leave them till the end. There was an application I saw for manufacturing. It was actually a Coca-Cola bottling plant, and they put in CBRS. They were monitoring this very simple machine, and the use case was, well, why? And they said, well, the Wi-Fi won't reach over here. We've got to monitor it. And for every hour that machine was down was $400,000 of revenue. one bottling machine. And so you look at things like this, like who are you going to call becomes important, right? With those types of revenue numbers, right?
Yeah, and if you apply that to, autonomous things that are going on, and some of those affect the production, you can that bottling thing you just mentioned, when you turn it into like an autonomous vehicle or stopping your production line, the costs are even north of that. So, and Wi-Fi simply hasn't been good enough for that environment.
Right. Okay, so I'm going to go over to Todd. He's been sitting there very patiently listening to all our banter and our jokes. So Todd from Nokia is sitting up there in Dallas. So Todd, take it away.
All right, thank you. I'm going to drop the video here because I'm going to be multitasking across some different things. So, all right, so thanks everybody. Great points everybody's brought up. Real quick slide on Nokia, who we are, what's our DNA, where we've come from, and really why are we playing in this space. We're a $26 billion company. Whenever you bring up the name Nokia, most people mentioned, the flip phone. However, our roots are extremely deep in the carrier space. Yes, we've sold off the flip phone portion of the business years ago, but we have become number one in both software and in private wireless networks, primarily driven by the history that we have in the investment, the R&D that we have made in this sector. And again, to give everybody just a quick snapshot, our first investment started back at the beginning of the double aughts. So you're looking at 20 years of investment. The first contracts for R&D were made 20 years ago with the major carriers. And my apologies, I have dogs that have that are barking outside the door. The timing couldn't have been worse, right? Is it too loud? Is that too loud? I'm going to keep going. Okay.
We can hear them.
And inside of these 98,000 employees, you see we've got about 1,000 people that are dedicated to these missions. Give me just 1 minute. My apologies.
Okay, we've had leaf blowers. I think we've had dogs before.
That's
a new
count
one.
against his 12 minutes, or are you giving him 13 minutes, Ian?
No, that's in his 12 minutes.
That's his 12 minutes,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah, stuff happens, right? We had I was doing a video interview once.
Thank you very much. My apologies, everybody. Thank you very much. So inside of these 98,000 employees, we've got about 1,000 employees dedicated to mission critical networks. We have been doing this for upwards of 40 years, and our DNA is actually on the OT side of the house, which is quite interesting. We're not born out of the IT side. So the importance of that is really that we're very comfortable in the OT space, and we also are a very strong advocate with our end users when it comes to bridging that gap between the IT and OT space. When you look at let's see here, up there you see a number of 260 wireless customers. I can tell you that is outdated. I just got some recent numbers today. We're at 350. And the goal of the company is actually try to push over 1,000 networks this year, okay, private wireless networks. And then over to the right, you see a lot of the references that we do have. These are the public references. We have quite a few more than that, and they span these very large mission critical networks that we've been doing over the past few decades. Next slide, please. All right, so focused investment in manufacturing and logistics. So Nokia has got dedicated R&D and resources pushed into effectively 10 activity sectors, of which manufacturing and logistics exist. And the nature of this business is such that the mission critical nature has shifted from business up to a mission critical. And I think it was referenced by both Ozer as well as Jim in the applications that are forcing that move from Wi-Fi over to LTE. And it's not just a move of switching one out for the other, right? There is also that possibility for hybrid networks to be implemented as well as that transition takes place. But what we are seeing is as the use case adoption takes place, there is a fervor for the uptake, which is not driving it in a linear fashion, rather a curve. And the uptake is significant. We play strongly in this space here as well. A lot of our customers, in fact, from our years in mission critical have downstream value chains that are actually the manufacturing sector itself. All right, great example of that is refineries and petrochem. Next slide, please. All right, so I commented a few minutes earlier about the business critical shift to mission critical. I like these graphics here because really what this is showing is, again, it's not Wi-Fi versus LTE. What this really is the business has shifted. And when we implement the networks that we're implementing, customers don't look at it for just a single use case. One of the biggest values that they see early on is collapsing the different networks that they have into a single network or two networks. And because of the prioritization and the deterministic nature of LTE, what we're able to do with it, we can actually prioritize clients, applications, and various use cases, a very large volume of them, to not interrupt one another, to not put any of them at risk, especially when you're dealing with operational networks and applications. So in this slide, the takeaway really is that transition has already started to take place. 3/4 of manufacturers have some type of a private wireless initiative. And I just saw a stat recently that 2/3 of those that are early on adopters have got, that are actually increasing their budgets for the coming year. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so what is the foundation of our IR 4.0? Anybody who's read that documentation knows that it's very voluminous, but what's at the core of this whole thing is ubiquitous connectivity. And the importance of getting the ubiquitous connectivity is what is going to be key to unlocking the technology dividends. just because you buy some equipment, just because you turn it on, does not mean that you're producing anything. The technology dividends are coming from a network that has been dimensioned properly and has an ability to scale in any direction as the business needs. And that's important because the windows of opportunities inside of the business models for manufacturers is changing rapidly, and also the windows of opportunity are much shorter. So you have to be able to take advantage of those opportunities and those changes, and not just internal to the company, but also external with the customers of these companies, placing demands on them to shift their business model to accommodate their needs. So we're experts at doing exactly that. We are the ones that have play a key role in getting that center part of the onion, if you will, correct. Once that is up, operational, more importantly, dimensioned right and stabilized, only then can you begin to push the expertise to the edge. And that's where the people have the knowledge of the problems. That's when they begin to innovate. So they become extremely receptive of the technology and begin to innovate on their own. It's a decentralized versus a centralized innovation. And that's really ultimately the success of IR 4.0. Next slide, please. Okay, this is my last slide. I'm gonna spend a tad bit of time on this one. One of the biggest issues with clients is everybody has a lot of use cases. The volume of use cases, there's no shortage for them. But what we do at Nokia is we utilize the expertise we have, and we have a very good understanding of the trends, what are the early adopters, and what is adopted at the mid or late phases. When you look at this picture here, if you pay attention to the right-hand side, I'm going to go through 4 of these areas that we see as really low-hanging fruit that we see almost all customers reaching for. I'm going to start with augmented worker, and the augmented worker, we have in the manufacturing sector, they have a very large shortage of personnel and continue to have that going forward. They're looking at the augmented worker as being able to keep them skilled, keep them safe, help them perform tasks. And in the market today, just as Ozer was commenting, I believe it was, the number of devices has increased significantly, and there is no indication that it won't continue to grow at a feverish pace. Again, augmented worker is one area where we see that. Voice and video communications, we see a heavy adoption of push to talk and push to video. This is primarily in the business critical area. And this is for workers to be able to do things like perform maintenance and be able to bring on one of the experts, for example, inside of the organization that may be remote. So, and it's also a tangible. We find them that the more tangible it is for them, the more consumption they have. So push to talk and push to video is another one. AGVs, that was already touched on. I couldn't agree with you more. We are heavily involved in this arena in the larger vehicle area and making them both autonomous as well as tele-remote, and then ultimately V2X. And we see the same patterns taking place with the AGV. The key with AGV is that we have a heavy interaction between a vehicle and humans, which brings in a safety parameter and the ability and need for tighter controls for those reasons. So this is definitely an area where we play. And then asset management, I'll say briefly that there is a lot of areas within asset management, but ultimately condition-based maintenance is where people are finding the richest, lowest hanging fruit, and they're starting out by just taking the monitoring that they have to date to know the real-time condition of their assets, especially the most expensive assets. With that, I'm going to hand it back to you, Ian.
Great, thank you. Good job. So, boy, we got through a lot there. I think actually I was commenting to the panelists earlier. This webinar is a record number of slides we've had before. So, but they told me to get through it. So they did. All right, so we've got some questions. If there are any more questions, please use the questions tab on the GoToWebinar control panel. We'll go through them in a minute. I've just got one quick slide here to sum up. And, you know, I kind of looked through all the presentations here and said, well, what's the commonalities? Connectivity issues. It says patient on there for some reason. But, you know, you've got connectivity issues in the building, out the building. Todd had a picture of the warehouse, and you'd notice there that everything was stacked up to the roof. And somebody had told me, you know, it's no good putting an access point on the roof of a warehouse expecting it to cover the whole building, because there's all these racks and metal underneath. It's not that simple. Coexistence with Wi-Fi, I think the general view, you know, Wi-Fi is not going away here. It has good uses. It has limitations. I think we highlighted that today. CBRS, private networks, 5G can address that a lot. And there's still some things that Wi-Fi is going to be good at. So putting Wi-Fi in the offices around the building, for example, or the common areas for break rooms, things like this. So generally, we don't see as private networks being a replacement for Wi-Fi. This is a coexistence. Lots of use cases. Voice comes up a lot here, if you noticed. Push to talk, and Oza showed the picture of the Motorola device really well there. Security, robots, guided vehicles, big ones, little ones, augmented workers. Todd mentioned that one. And actually, I've seen the Nokia has a demo of the augmented worker. It's actually a data center, and it shows you can actually wear the headset, and it shows you where to plug the wires in the video. It's pretty cool. But it also could be, you know, on an assembly floor, on an assembly line, you know, obviously for manufacturing as well. CBRS plays a role here, not just because Oz is wearing a very cool sweatshirt, but obviously the ability for an industrial here to actually deploy their own network. And as Jim pointed out, you know, that network can be in building and out of building. You can tie in multiple plants, and actually one of the questions we'll get into that. Everybody thinks of manufacturing all indoors, but really it's not. You've got materials coming in and complete product leaving, and there's a coordination there. You hear about just-in-time supply or just-in-time delivery, things like this. Well, that applies here very much so. And this is hard, this is complex. I mean, you look at the number of use cases we've got, and actually Todd's last picture of that manufacturing plant, there's a lot of stuff going off in there. There's a lot of pieces. And Jim said, you know, Ethernet still rules. It takes a long time to change a manufacturing line. The automotive section is a really good example of this. There's a reason that auto manufacturers update their cars every year. It's because they have to change the line. And when they do that, they can put in new Ethernet. Wireless is one of the big ways to actually reduce the cost of that and make it more flexible. So you do hear about you know, flexible manufacturing, smart factories, and there's always a wireless component to that. All right, so we've got some questions, and I'll go through them here. If you don't have any questions, again, use the GoToWebinar control panel on the questions tab there. So the first one, actually, Oza, you've been very patient. I'll come back to you, and I'm just going to read it here. Does Celona run the network as a service for the enterprise, or do you have partners that do that?
We do have partners that do that. So we provide the infrastructure, software, hardware as a product and subscription, and then rely on our partners to deliver installation, ongoing management, maintenance support, and service. Although we do have tier 1 to multiple tiered support infrastructure. So just like you would work with a Cisco managed services partner or a channel partner, you would work with us. We will in the back end offer ongoing support and warranty.
Right. Okay. And Jim, you touched on all the operational side, that call center 24/7, et cetera, et cetera. Do you do the install of the networks as well, or are you focusing on the back end? You're muted.
Thank you for that reminder. It really depends. Typically we don't do the install, and we don't do the install for anything in building. But you know, we have tower crews, we have fiber crews in a footprint of the U.S. So if there's an opportunity in that footprint or nearby, and it's outdoor, then we're able to do it. But typically not. Typically we rely on partners.
Right. Okay. And Todd, you've got some. You had a lot of brands on there. You also have some pretty sophisticated manufacturing. You mentioned, I think one of your slides had European manufacturing. So when you go into a specialized plant like that, would you go with a partner, or I mean, is Ford going to come to Nokia directly, or would they go through, I don't know, Bosch or?
Yeah,
something?
we do. So there's a couple things. One is we're a big advocate. There's a lot of pieces to these projects, and we favor the system engineers that are trusted. I'm sorry, the system integrators that are trusted by the client. They can take many forms, but we often look to the client to basically structure how we should be coming to them and in what pieces. What we find, most clients want to see us in agreement with the SI at the table with them, because this journey is a 10-year journey. It's a 5 or a 10-year journey, and they want to be able to de-risk their operations by having us in agreement and working together.
Right. So we've got a question here on the packet core, the EPC in LTE terms and 5G core in 5G terms. So Jim, I'll start with you. Your GeoCore, I think it said this, but that is the EPC. Does it also support 5G as well?
Well, yes. I mean, it's a 5G ready core. But when you're talking about the CBRS band, there are currently no 5G devices, and there are currently no 5G chipsets that are in the radios like Nokia has. So you can have a core all ready for 5G, but it won't mean anything. But I think the important thing to take away about 5G is that with CBRS, it is a band where the specification has already been created, and the 5G element is going to be something called non-standalone. So that core you invest in today, because 5G is going to be built on the foundation of 4G, of a 4G core, it's not like you're going to have to rip and replace that core. And the same thing with certain radios. If your radio layer, if you don't have a chip in the physical radio portion of it, if your chip is back, then those radios can be upgraded to 5G too, once it becomes kind of more locked down in that band 48 CBRS band.
Okay. Ozad, there's a question here for you. Do you have your own EPC core, or do you use a partner?
It's our own EPC core extension of our software platform. It's by nature, I'm going to use a very popular technical word. I'm going to call it cloud native, in the sense that it can be deployed in a bare metal Azure, AWS, private edge cloud. So it's a modern way of deploying network infrastructure from our perspective in the enterprise, and is inspired by the 5G standard. So it's 4G, 5G ready. It's our software, supports our radios, managed from our cloud portal.
Right. Okay. All right. A couple more questions here. Todd, I'll start with you on this one. Security's come up a lot here. There's a question here about how do you manage security? And that's obviously a very nebulous question. It's going to depend on the use case and the customer. So I guess I'll start with you. The question is, where does security come up in the discussion with clients? Is it part of the early discussion? Is it, oh, by the way, we need security? How do they approach it from your experience? I know you've had a lot of, you've looked at a lot of different accounts. So,
which is this to? Is this to Todd?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, sorry about that. You're cutting in and out. No, I tell you what, security for us, we're 3GPP compliant, and security for us is a big issue in a positive way. It comes up early, but it doesn't persist. A lot of clients don't spend a lot of time on it once we have described to them what it is our 3GPP compliance, and then knowing that it's safe from end to end. So it doesn't become a strong conversation that continues on and on. We can kind of open and close that door with them rather quickly, and they're comfortable with it. So we don't have. It's not like it's like I said, it's something that comes up, but it is able to be handled pretty quickly up front. And the question does come up early on in the conversation.
Okay, Jim, same question. Where does security come up with you guys? I mean, obviously you've got the support end of the back end of this as well, right?
Well, to start out with, I think, more and more companies are building zero trust networks. But when you look at LTE versus Wi-Fi, it's kind of the over-the-air element that's where LTE is more secure than Wi-Fi in most situations. And LTE is based on that SIM card you put in the device provides you that two-way authentication that, with Wi-Fi you have to deal with certificates. So where security comes up, and this is real world example, is we have customers that were hacked and held ransom because of their Wi-Fi network. And they made a strategic decision to switch what they were doing over Wi-Fi. And it was outdoor and it was a mesh Wi-Fi type design. And not only did, the security issues go away and they're no longer getting hacked and held for ransom, but they also improved their throughput and other kind of performance metrics because of the LTE versus Wi-Fi. So it comes up like that, I guess, in real world situations.
Yep. And then Oza, same question for you to make this last question then. So where does security come up for you? And, I assume it's part of the solution, obviously, but, where does that discussion start and lead to?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, many of these environments have to support critical applications, which means they have to be private in the sense that from a satisfying network security requirements. So in a traditional enterprise network, whether it's wired or Wi-Fi, you have to authorize a device, you have to access control the user, put them in a different segment, you have to figure out what the application is. Ideally, you want to use centralized encryption. Ideally, you want to use device level authorization. You want to get integrated with the network access control systems and the firewall policies that are in place. So there's like a big checklist, a 12-item checklist. Just by the nature of you taking care of a lot of the authentication, authorization, encryption, as Jim mentioned, natively in LTE wireless and with the SIM cards, a lot of those checkboxes can be moved relatively quickly with LTE wireless. And one interesting benefit of using SIM cards is I just started kind of realizing it after I started spending more time on cellular wireless. You can change the profile of a SIM card remotely in our system, right? You can say, hey, that device actually now belongs to a different site or a different group or a different segment. You don't have to force the user to do anything on the device, which can be the most painful part of the process, right? Select a different SSID, install a different certificate and everything else. So remote authorization, remote control of that SIM card's identity has been very attractive for our customers.
Yeah. Did you say that was, you realized when your son started using cellular?
No, since I started spending more time on cellular, sorry.
I had visions
This is
of
what happens when you have good coverage in your garage for Wi-Fi.
Yeah, I was going to say, my kids know that you can control a SIM remotely because I shut them down sometimes. So. All right, well, we're about out of time. Again, we are being recorded today. We'll make the recording available in a day or two. I want to thank Jim, Oza, and Todd. This has been great. We covered a lot of ground. If there are follow-up questions, please let I will forward the questions on to those three, or we can answer them. We do have two more in this series. The next one is on transportation logistics. The third one's on energy, oil, gas. I think Jim mentioned mining. We'll put that one in there. So, but we'll let Todd go now and go, let his dogs out wherever he put them. They've been really quiet. So with that, thank you guys and talk to you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.